Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this week's episode, the week ending the 3rd of August 1924, socialism suffers a setback, metrication suffers a setback, India is on the verge of becoming the breadbasket of the world, and a correspondent alerts Times readers to a previously unidentified tyranny. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. There's been a train crash in Edinburgh. 4 people are dead. There is a threat of a power worker strike. On Wednesday, the Times published an article on Italy's national militia. This is what the fascist party's black shirts are calling themselves these days. They are being incorporated into the state. Also in Italy, there have been more reports of newspapers being closed down under the new press decree. Last week I mentioned that there was a rebellion in Brazil, and that the rebels had captured Sao Paulo. Government forces have now retaken the city. In the 25th of May episode, I mentioned that the Times had published a supplement dedicated to the Empire exhibition at Wembley, not once, but twice. Well, this week, they did it again. This week, the Times also published a series of articles on the border between the United Kingdom and the Irish Free State, which is to be the subject of an inquiry. This is not going to be an easy task, as the British and Irish populations of Ulster are highly intermingled. That, of course, is if nationality is the only criterion, and military and economic considerations are ignored. The article points to a few examples where those interests clash. It also points out a number of grievances, such as allegations of police brutality, gerrymandering and discrimination, that have a familiar ring. The housing bill that calls for a massive government building programme over the next 15 years has reached the House of Lords. The Lord Chancellor, Lord Haldane, claimed that new housing would reduce crime and illness and therefore save money. Given that the 1920s had levels of crime that we can only dream of, I am not sure it is going to be quite as successful as he thinks when it comes to crime. When it comes to illness, he may be right, but I would point out to the noble lord that if people live longer, then more of them will reach the state pension age, and that is going to cost a lot of money. Haldane also used the phrase, "We're all socialists now." This did get me wondering if this was the origin of the phrase. It wasn't. It was first coined in the 1880s. On Wednesday, the Times reported on a case of unpaid wages. A couple of girls went to work at a basket weaving factory. They thought they would be paid 11 shillings a week, but it turned out that they were paid on a piecework basis, only getting paid for what they produced, and were only paid 2 shillings. They have taken their now former employer to court and won. So once again, the little guy, or little girl, goes to court and wins. Having said that, I wonder how keen this employer is going to be to employ people in future. One of the black marks against David Lloyd George's time in office as Prime Minister is the allegation that he openly sold honours such as peerages and knighthoods. Thank goodness no one would dream of doing that nowadays. At least openly. Anyway, this week a colonel took a company to court for failing to secure an honour he had paid for, and lost. The Times thought this was quite right, but was grateful to the colonel for bringing out into the open how the corruption worked. There's been a great storm in London. Several rail stations were closed due to flooding. An international scout jamboree is being held in Wembley Stadium. The Paris Olympics has come to an end, but there was no ceremonial lowering of the Olympic flag. Perhaps because that was not part of the ceremony in those days. Perhaps because the flag had been stolen. In the 13th of July episode, I mentioned the attempts of the Metricators to mess up Britain's currency. What I hadn't realised is that this was not the first time they had tried. This is from a Mr. Alfred Watkins of Hereford. In 1849, the florin was introduced for the sole purpose of getting people used to decimals. The experiment has lasted 3/4 of a century, and has been an abject failure. No one thinks, deals or calculates in florins as they do in the favourite half-crown, the 1/8 of a pound. This is in spite of the shoals of them coined, and the long continuance of the legend on them 1/10 of a pound. They are inconveniently near in size to other coins, in no way facilitate giving change, and are a worry in counting quantities of cash, and should be abolished. Except they, /it, wasn't, and lives on as the 10-pence piece. The British have never adopted a metric measure or decimal coinage voluntarily. I saw this in Tuesday's edition. It's from a Mr. W. H. Peto. A parcel of fish sent by the night mail from the north of Scotland to places over 50 miles south or west of London by the state-owned and state-managed parcel post takes 2 nights on its journey, a serious matter for perishable goods. If sent by the privately owned and privately managed railways, it is delivered after 1 night. Now you would have thought that was case closed and that communists the world over would abandon their ideology and adopt something more sensible. But no. This is from Thursday. The newly published statutes of the Third Communist International restate a number of the principles by which this revolutionary organisation is guided. The Communist International coordinates rather more, as we shall see, the activities of communist parties around the globe. The Communist Party of each country is called a section of the Communist International, and each section must carry out implicitly all the commands of the Central Committee of the International in Moscow. The International was very much under the thumb of the Soviet Union. The national sections may appeal against the Central Committee's decisions only to the Annual General Congress of the International. In the meantime, they must obey the Central Committee's orders, even if they do not approve of them. Not exactly flexible. The programme of each national section must be submitted to the Central Committee for approval, and the committee has the power to expel individuals or whole sections from the International. No Communist Party official may resign without the Central Committee's authorization. A member may not proceed to another country without the permission of his own national section. Each national section must hold itself ready to take illegal action if the Central Committee so instructs it. Now that's what I call Russian interference. I have had occasion to wonder if the Soviet Union was an example of communism with Russian characteristics, or Russia with communist characteristics, and I am forced to wonder that again. Last week I mentioned that bread prices had risen in London. On Wednesday the Times dedicated an editorial to the subject. It turns out that grain production is down almost everywhere, with problems in the US, Canada, Russia and Romania. But not everywhere. In India there is a substantial surplus left over from last year's harvest. Not what I expected to read. On the same page the Times published a letter from a W. Emery Barnes, Hullsian Professor of Divinity in the University of Cambridge, with the headline, "A Corrupt Tyranny." I wondered if he was going to condemn the Soviet Union, Fascist Italy, or maybe even the honour system. Not quite. It is no doubt known to you that an influential deputation is about to approach the government to urge upon it the necessity of some helpful reform to our corrupted spelling. May I ask you to give your readers just one of the strong reasons which impel reformers forward? The reason is the small child at school. We begin, Mr. T. W. Dunn once said to me, by teaching the child unreason. The learning child asks why, but if the subject is spelling, there is and there can be no answer. Why has cat a C and kitten a K? Are not the two creatures relations? Why has breast an A, while chest is without? Why must we spell no with a W, while so and go and their neighbours get on very well as they are? Let now keep its W, for it wants it badly. And may we not build a house without a U, which is only an irrational luxury? Alas, it is the simple words which a child first learns that are spelt after the most arbitrary fashion. Moreover, when the child is a little older and begins to meet with 16th and 17th century books, he will ask why he may not spell simply as they spell, believe, thieves, near. For those listening to the podcast, they are all spelt with double E's. The only reason we can give is the authority of Samuel Johnson, who had no children and no sense of humour. With that dictionary, we metaphorically hit small children on the head, an uneducational action. Samuel Johnson was a tyrant, and I submit, sir, our present spelling is a corrupt tyranny. Anyway, that is all for this week and for the next month or so. I'm going to take a break for August, and I aim to be back in September. But I promise nothing.